Over many years of working as a taxi driver, I have seen a lot, but recent events have been truly extraordinary. I had a regular client whom I used to drive to work in the mornings and pick up in the evenings. She was a beautiful and intelligent woman, 35 years old, with character and energy. We became friends, often discussing her family and children, and I realized that I had become something of an on-call psychologist for her. One day she got into my car, crying with her makeup smeared. She was silent the entire way, just sobbing and looking out the window. I felt sorry for her, but I didn't ask questions. After a few minutes, she turned to me with a determined look and said we were going to a bar. I was a bit taken aback. "Are you sure? You have to go to work." She replied that she wasn't going to work today. She couldn't show up in such a terrible state. Besides, I need to relieve some stress. I tried to dissuade her from going to a bar and suggested we just stop by a store to buy some alcohol and have a little picnic. She agreed to my suggestion. We went to the store, bought what we wanted, and headed to the waterfront. At the waterfront, we drank cognac. She told me about her problems at home. Her husband started drinking heavily after his father's death, and she could no longer stay with him, but was afraid to leave because of the children. She complained that he became aggressive when drunk. It was a typical story: an alcoholic husband and unruly children. I felt sorry for her, and after drinking a bit more, we ended up in the back seat of my car. I was a free man without a wife or children, so I embraced the situation with enthusiasm. Jessica turned out to be quite experienced in bed, and we had a great time. After that, we went for a walk, finishing off the cognac. From that day on, I picked her up not as a taxi driver, but as a friend and lover. She still lived with her husband, occasionally disappearing for a few days, but our relationship was no longer just friendly. This went on for several months. We drank, spent time at my place or in the car, sometimes spending the night together. We enjoyed these carefree, no-strings-attached relationships. Then Jessica stopped answering my calls, which happened when she had problems with her husband. A few days later, I got a call from her address, and the dispatcher specifically requested that I take the order. I was sure Jessica had called for me, but it turned out to be quite different from what I expected. A man in his 40s, wearing an expensive coat, was standing by the entrance. He got into the car, named the address, and we drove off. He was silent the entire way, deep in thought. Then he paid and got out of the car. Jessica called unexpectedly, sounding anxious. She spoke quickly and seriously, asking to meet urgently. I drove to her house, and she ran out in a light jacket, quickly getting into the car. I immediately drove her home, having missed her. 5 minutes from my house, she said, "Brian, I'm pregnant. 2 months already." This news shocked me. I asked Jessica, "Is the baby mine?" She replied, "Of course. My husband hasn't touched me for almost 3 years." We started discussing what to do next. She was thoughtful, and so was I. By the time we reached my house, I had already made up my mind. I was going to take her and her children from her husband and raise all the kids together, creating a normal family. I was fully ready for a serious relationship. At my house, we didn't rush to get out of the car, kissing like teenagers. In the midst of foreplay, when we were down to our underwear, the car door suddenly opened, and someone's hand pulled me out into the cold. It was the same man I had driven a few days ago. He turned out to be Jessica's husband. He knew about her infidelity and had been following her. Our conversation was short. He punched me, threw her suitcase into a puddle, and said she would never see the children again. After that, everything became clear. Jessica stayed with me. We lived together for a month, and I began to understand who she really was. Her husband was not an abusive alcoholic, he was a decent man who went to church on Sundays. Jessica was bored living with Tom, so she sought excitement on the side. I was that excitement for her. We lived together for a month, and then she left. She was uncomfortable living with a simple taxi driver in a small apartment. She tried to go back to her wealthy husband. I heard her calling him while hiding in the bathroom. I don't know if Tom took her back. I also don't know what happened to the baby, or if there was one at all.